My name is Anna. I'm a young woman in my 20s, and I used to think my life was a movie I'd never seen before. A quiet little story with a predictable happy ending. I was focused on building a stable future, with a wonderful fiancé and a sweet sister. But what if the people you trust the most are writing a completely different script for you? That's what I found out on Christmas Eve when I came home to a scene that didn't make any sense. It was a beautiful, peaceful night, but a terrible secret was waiting for me. What would you do if your entire life was a lie? I woke up the next morning and knew exactly what I had to do. The revenge you're about to hear is far bigger and more satisfying than anything you can imagine. Let me take you back to where it began. I came back to America after a week on the road. The kind of week that leaves grit under your nails and a bus map still rolling in your head. Work had sent me from New York City to Chicago and then home to Cleveland. The late train woke me out after midnight. I paid $32 for a taxi that smelled like coffee and rain, and I asked the driver to take Birch Street slowly so I could look at the houses. When our small blue house came into view, two windows like kind eyes, a crooked rail on the steps, and a porch that remembers every boot. It felt like the first deep breath after a long day. My sister Leah was waiting on that porch as if she had been there for hours. She held the post with both hands. Her knuckles were white and her face had that tight look I knew from when we were kids and hiding a broken vase. I waved and dragged my suitcase over the same crack in the walk that always tries to trip me. The wheels rattled in their old friendly way. "Hey," I said, smiling just because I was home. Because this was America, and our little house, and the night was kind. I thought she'd smile back. She did not. Her mouth trembled and her eyes flicked to the door and back to me like a bird that cannot choose a branch. I set my bag on the first porch plank. The wood gave its hollow knock in reply. The sound that says you belong here. From the doorway, I could see into our living room, the couch that sags in the middle, the maple side table we haggled down to $60 at a garage sale, the framed map of America with pins in the cities we love. The house smelled like lemon soap and the last warm air of late summer. A moth circled the porch light and then rested on the white paint like a thumbprint. "What happened?" I asked. "Is it money? Is it the car? Is it Mom's old house papers?" Again, I had a list of small problems we could fix with time and common sense. Leah did not wait for another word. She blurted clear and sharp. "I married your rich fiancé. Now please don't cry." The sentence landed between us like a box that is heavier than it looks. I heard the light hum and the soft buzz of that tired moth. The street went quiet. The way a street goes quiet when it is listening. It felt like the world took one big step to the left and forgot to bring me with it. My knees let go without asking me first. I reached for the rail and caught nothing but air. The boards jumped up. The sky dropped down. The dark slipped into my ears like water. I did not scream. I folded and fell soft as a paper letter falling from a table. "Do you need a hand?" called a man's voice from across the street. It was Mr. Whitaker, who has lived opposite us so long that his mailbox paint fades and brightens between summers. "I've got her," Leah said, and she did. She is smaller than me, but shock gives people a kind of borrowed strength. She got me inside and onto the old couch. She slid a pillow under my neck and tucked the throw over my legs. A cool cloth found my forehead. In the kitchen, the tap ran and closed. In the hall, the clock counted seconds like coins on a wooden table. The house did the thing old houses do when they love you. It held me, and it did not ask any questions. When I woke, I rose through the dark the way a diver swims toward light. It was still night. Or maybe the edge of morning. The room had that thin blue color that knows the sun is near. Leah stood in the doorway with a glass of water and eyes that had cried and dried and cried again. I opened my mouth to ask the time, or to ask if she was hurt, or to ask if this was a dream. Instead, I laughed. It came out wild and bright. I laughed so hard that tears ran into my ears and tickled my neck. The sound startled her. It startled me too. "Anna," she said, scared and cross at once. "Don't. Please don't." She thought I had broken. I understood why, but the laugh did not come from shock. It came from a sudden blinding clarity. I was free. The words surprised me too, but they were true in the way the rail is crooked and the step is chipped and the paint is blue. I wasn't happy that a promise had been bent out of shape. I wasn't happy that a wedding had been rushed like a sale on a street corner. I was happy because I knew something Leia did not know yet. Something real and countable, measured in dollars, and in facts, and in the weight of a ring I had placed in a drawer before I left for Chicago. I sat up on the couch and told Leia we needed to talk. Not fast, not loud, just steady. The house was quiet but strong around us, like a hand at our backs. "I'm not going to cry," I said. "I need to tell you what I learned before my trip." She pressed the damp cloth to her face and nodded. She looked small on the edge of the chair, as if one wrong word could push her off. The clock in the hall ticked like a calm heart. I thought of the pins on our map of America, of the porch boards that know our steps. I thought of truth, the kind you can count. Then I began. The first crack had shown up months ago, when Grant told me about a condo near the lake in Cleveland and a string of deals in New York City that would set us up for life. He wore a sharp navy suit on those nights, and he made sure to hang it where everyone could see. One evening, when I lifted the jacket to make room in the closet, a tag slipped out of the inner pocket, a rental slip, $120 a day, due back Monday by noon. He said the $700 watch on his wrist was a family piece, but the crown stuck, and the brand name was spelled wrong on the clasp. The car he posed with in front of the house had a dealer plate and a thin paper tag tucked in the back window. Later, I found the lease statement in his glove box. $1,200 a month for something that never truly belonged to him. Money talk came easy to him, like a song he had practiced. He would hold a menu like a stage prop and order the most expensive thing with a brave little nod. Then, when the server walked away, he would lean close and whisper that a payment was stuck, and would I mind sending him $85 just this once, because his account would clear at midnight. Once at a fancy steakhouse on Euclid Avenue, he handed over his card with a flourish. And while the server was gone, he asked me to spot him a small bridge. His words until a bonus landed. The bonus never did. When we got home, I found a folded bill in his coat pocket for the suit rental. 3 days at $120, a total $360, plus a late fee that made the numbers feel like a bruise. I told myself there was nothing wrong with wanting nice things. I told myself he was just trying, but wanting and pretending are not the same. The night I knew, truly knew, was a Tuesday on West 14th. He said he had to meet a buyer. I had the afternoon off and a slow, heavy feeling in my chest that would not leave. I took a walk and drifted toward the corner where the old garage sits, the one with the hand-painted sign and the smell of oil that lives in the air. And there he was in a gray shirt with his name stitched above the pocket, Grant. He was not talking with a buyer. He was bent over a small car, his hands black with grease, his face fixed in a worried line as he tried to free a stubborn bolt. A woman named Rosa, the manager, saw me watching and waved me into the shade. She offered me water. She said he was part-time, that he was good with carburetors, but late with lunch money. And no, he did not own the place. She said it kindly, like she was sorry to be the one holding the light. I am not ashamed to say I walked home slowly and quietly. There is nothing wrong with honest work. A mechanic keeps America moving, but lies break the axles of trust. That night, when he bragged that he had $50,000 saved, I asked him to teach me his secret. He opened a budgeting app to show me a sample plan, and for a breath-long second, the true balance flashed. $312. He covered the screen and laughed, saying the display was lagging. At the top of his drawer, I later found letters about overdrafts and a note he had written to himself. Look rich. Be rich. As if the first could ever become the second by force of will. I did not confront him that night. I packed for my trip to Chicago, and then to New York City, and back to Cleveland. I put the ring in the maple table drawer beside the spare keys. I wrote a short note to myself on the back of an old receipt. Truth is better than shine. I needed space to think in straight lines, not the loops his stories made. On the train, I watched the fields and the towns pass and felt my chest grow light. Each mile felt like a clean bill paid in full. By the time I crossed into New York City, I knew I would end the engagement. All that was left was to say it. I told her everything, not like a fire hose but like a slow, steady leak. I started with the suit. I told her about the rental tag. She looked confused as if this was some game. Then I told her about the watch. He said it was a family piece I said from his grandfather, but the brand was spelled wrong on the back. She just shook her head, a small, stubborn movement. She looked so young, sitting there on the couch, the same couch where we would watch old movies together on a Friday night, and she would tell me about a new boy and a new hope. She looked so much like a little girl who had done something wrong and knew it in her heart. He told me you don't understand the big picture, she said in a small voice. He said you were so careful with every single penny that you'd never get a chance to live. Her words stung, but I let them go because the truth was more important than the sting. I told her about the car, how I saw a lease statement for $1,200 a month. I told her about the hotel he rented in New York City with a $120 a day charge on my credit card. I had to pay that. I told her about the bills for the suits, the $120 a day, the late fee that made my account go over. The money part she was confused about. He said you were helping him. She said that you were helping his credit. She said the lies and I saw her face crumble with them. Then I told her about the garage on West 14th Street, about the hand-painted sign and the smell of oil, about the woman named Rosa. I told her I saw him there with grease on his hands and that he was not a part-time genius, but a full-time liar. I told her he didn't even own a car. The car he said was his was a rental. His job was a lie. His money was a lie. His name was probably a lie for all I knew. Laya just sat there and her face grew paler and paler, and the tears that had been so close to her eyes finally fell. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Her apology was for the lies she had told. The tears were for the lies he had told. He told me he had a secret for us, that he would help us both. She was not just a little girl who had done something wrong. She was a woman who had been fooled. She was a woman who was ashamed. I put my hands on her hands. They were so cold. I sat there on the floor and looked at my little sister, and the hurt in her eyes was like a knife in my heart. He had hurt us both. He had hurt us both by the same kind of lie, the same kind of betrayal. He had taken advantage of my love and loyalty and my desire to build a life. He had taken advantage of her youth and her dreams and her longing to have a life that was bigger and brighter than our little house in Cleveland. He had hurt us both, and for the first time I felt something new, something more than relief, something more than anger. I felt the powerful desire for justice. I told her that he was a liar. She had to believe me. Laya confessed everything. She confessed that he had told her that he had no choice, that I had become cold and distant, that I was more in love with money than I was with him. I was in love with a job, with an idea. He said he was going to leave me, that he was going to take everything he had, and he was going to leave it to her. She believed him because she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that she was special enough to be his. She wanted to believe that she was special enough to be rich. She was blinded by the dream of a new life. She was so ashamed that she could not even look me in the eyes. I told her that it was not her fault, that he was the one who was wrong. "It's not your fault," I said. "He is the one who is wrong. He is the one who is going to pay for this." I took her hands. "We are going to find a way to get out of this mess. Together." She looked at me and nodded, and the nod was the first honest thing she had done in a long time. She looked at me and I could see that she was ready to fight. "What do we do now?" she asked. I smiled at her, and my smile was as solid as the foundation of our house. "We find a lawyer," I said. We were sisters again, and we had a fight to win. We had our fight to win, and the first step was to find a champion. Not a knight in shining armor, but a woman with a clean desk and a sharp mind. I called a family law attorney named Charlotte Reed, a woman my boss had mentioned once as being tough but fair. Her office was in a tall glass building in downtown Cleveland. The kind of building that makes you feel both small and serious all at once. The air in the elevator was cold and silent, a far cry from the warmth of our small house. Laya squeezed my hand. Her touch felt different now, no longer a grab for help but a quiet sign of solidarity. Charlotte's office was not what I expected. Instead of stacks of paper and a harried look, everything was neat. A single plant sat on her windowsill and framed degrees from Ohio State lined the wall. She was in her late 50s, with kind eyes and a firm set to her mouth. She didn't offer us coffee or small talk. She just gestured to the two stiff chairs in front of her desk and said, "Tell me what happened." And so we did. I started with my side of the story, with the little things that began to feel so big. I told her about the rental slip for the suit and the way it felt like a tiny cut that wouldn't stop bleeding. I told her about the so-called Rolex and how the brand was spelled wrong on the back. I pulled out a handful of papers from my bag, all the evidence I had collected. The bank statements, the note about his overdrafts, the copy of his lease agreement for a car he said he owned. I saw Charlotte's eyes flick over the numbers on the papers. I saw her look at the dollar signs and I saw her face harden a little. Laya took over, then her voice surprisingly steady as she spoke about her side of the story. She told Charlotte how Grant had approached her, how he had promised her a life of luxury, and how he had said I was too cold and too careful with money to deserve him. She told Charlotte about the whirlwind of lies and half-truths and how she had been so blind. She said she had paid for the marriage license with her own money and that Grant had told her it was $120. She said he had promised to pay her back with a huge sum of cash from his supposed investment firm. She just wanted a life of her own. A life that felt less like a book filled with rules and more like a movie. When we were done, the silence in the room felt heavy. Charlotte leaned back in her leather chair, her fingers linked over her stomach. "He's a grifter," she said the word, sounding hard and flat in the quiet room. "A professional fraud. You've done well to document everything. These are not just feelings. They are facts." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. She believed us. She saw the truth. Laya looked down at her hands and a single tear fell on her coat. "I thought I was getting everything," she whispered. "I thought I was getting a rich life and a perfect husband, and all I got was a bunch of bills." Charlotte nodded. She told Laya that Grant had probably been using her credit cards and bank accounts to pay for his lavish lifestyle. She said we needed to move quickly to separate her finances from his. Charlotte laid out our legal options. We could file for a divorce and make sure Laya was not responsible for any of his debts. She said we could also seek an annulment, but that would be a more complex process and cost more money. We looked at each other, and we both knew what we had to do. The divorce was the most important thing. It was a clean break. It was a chance to start over. Charlotte told us it would cost $500 to start the process, and we both looked down at our hands. It was a lot of money, but it was nothing compared to the $10,000 in debt he had put Laya in. It was an investment in a future that was free of his lies. We walked out of her office into the cool Cleveland air, and the city felt different. We had our champion. We had our plan. Laya was quiet beside me. She kept looking at me, her eyes full of some new kind of emotion. I put my arm around her shoulder. She did not just get a bunch of bills. She got something else, a sister who would not leave her side. She got a new kind of freedom. We had our armor now. The truth and the law were on our side and we were ready for a fight. The first step was to face him. We would go to his garage and we would tell him it was over. We would tell him he had lost. We were ready to face him. We had our shoes on and my hand was on the doorknob. The plan was solid. We would go to the garage. We would speak with Rosa and we would tell Grant it was over. We would leave the paperwork with him. We would tell him he had lost. But the knock on the door changed everything. It was not a hard knock, but a soft, hesitant one, like someone who was not sure they were welcome. I looked at Laya. Her eyes were wide. She did not need to ask who it was. She knew. Grant stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets. His usual slick hair was a mess. The smile he wore was a weak, nervous thing. He looked at me and then at Laya. He could see that the two of us were no longer on opposite sides of the street. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice quiet. He didn't sound like the confident man I knew. He sounded small and desperate. "I know I messed up. He tried to step inside, but I put my hand on the doorknob and pushed the door to block his way. "You can say what you need to say from the porch, Grant," I said. He looked at me, and I saw a flash of anger in his eyes. He was not used to being denied. He was used to getting what he wanted. He took a deep breath and began his act. "I did it for us, Anna," he said. "I wanted to make you proud. I wanted to have a better life for us. I wanted a life that was as big as my dreams." He went on about how the economy was tough, how he had a plan, and how it all fell apart. He blamed everyone but himself. I just stood there and watched him. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt a kind of quiet strength, the kind of strength that comes from knowing the truth. "That's not what you did, Grant," I said, my voice steady. He looked at me, and I could see that he was trying to figure out what I knew. He had no idea what was coming. I held out my hand. "Give me back my diamond ring, and we will call it even." He looked at my hand and then at me. "What are you talking about?" he said. "The ring is with Laya." "No, it's not," I said. "I put it in a drawer before I left for my trip. I knew I was going to leave you, and I didn't want to leave you with my ring. I knew I was going to break up with you. I knew you were a liar and a cheat. I knew you didn't have a single dollar to your name. I knew you were going to take Leia's money. I knew you were going to hurt her." My words were like blows. Each one landed with a thud. His face went pale. His mouth hung open. He looked at me and then at Laya. He could see that there was no way out. "You're a fraud," I said. "You're a liar. You're a cheat. And you're a coward." His face went from pale to red. He was not used to being called out. He was used to being the one in control. He tried one last time to gain control. He put on a show of remorse. "I'm sorry," he said. "I made a mistake. I want to make it right. I just need a little help to get started. I need $800 to start over. I will pay you back, I promise." I just looked at him. There it was. The real reason he was here. He was not here to apologize. He was here to get money. "I don't hate you because you are poor, Grant," I said. "I hate you because you used lies to build a life, and you used my sister to do it. We are not giving you $800. We are telling you that you have lost." Laya stepped out from behind me. She was a little shaky, but her voice was strong. "The marriage is over, Grant. I'm filing for a divorce. You have nothing left. It's over." He looked at Laya and he knew it was true. He had lost everything. He had lost his fake life, his fake money, and his fake wife. He had nothing left. He turned and walked away. He walked down the porch steps and onto the street. He did not look back. He just walked away, a man with nothing left to his name but lies. The cold air rushed in. The silence was louder than the noise. We closed the door. We had won. We had won the first battle, but the war was not over. The bills would start to come in. The truth would come out. It was a long road ahead, but we were ready. We were ready for whatever came next. We were ready, but what came next was a lot of paper. Not the fun kind like birthday cards or postcards from faraway places. This was the kind of paper that makes your stomach drop. Thin white envelopes with clear windows on the front. Credit card statements. Collection notices. Invoices from companies I had never heard of. They began to arrive almost as soon as Grant walked out of our lives. They rattled through the mail slot every single day, and each one felt like a small, sharp piece of his lie. Laya would stand in the kitchen, a handful of letters in her hand, her face getting paler with each one she opened. He had put everything in her name. The tuxedo rentals for all of the weddings he had attended, where he pretended to be a wealthy businessman. The car lease for the luxury vehicle he drove around for a weekend and returned 3 days late. Bills from restaurants with names I could barely pronounce. He had even put her name on a short-term loan he'd taken out to buy a cheap, flashy watch. The total amount was staggering, more than she had in her savings account. She had thought she was getting a husband with a perfect credit score and a huge bank account, but what she got was a pile of debt and a credit rating that had a terrible look on its face. It was sickening. For a long time I just watched her. I wanted to yell, to scream at her, to say I told you so. But what good would that do? She was already broken. The reality of what she had done, the mistake she had made, was staring her in the face. She had lost so much. She had lost her dignity. She had lost the trust of her family and her friends. The dream she had been chasing had turned into a nightmare of debt. I looked at her and I saw a scared little girl who had made a terrible mistake. I couldn't be angry with her. I just wanted to help. So I did. I pulled out my own savings, the money I had worked so hard for. The money I had saved for a down payment on a house, for a comfortable future. I used it to pay off his debts. Each time I wrote a check, I felt a piece of me break off. It was hard. It was so hard. I was paying for his lies. I was paying for his crimes. I was paying to fix a mess that I had no part in creating. But I couldn't let my sister sink. I couldn't let her drown in the sea of his lies. So I just kept writing checks, and I kept praying that the day would come when the last one was gone. Laya was so ashamed. She couldn't look me in the eye. She just kept saying, "I'm so sorry, Anna." I would just shake my head and tell her that it was okay. It was a lie. But it was a lie she needed to hear. She needed to know that she was not alone. She needed to know that she had a sister who would do anything for her. She needed to know that I would not leave her. The bills kept coming in and we just kept paying them. It was a long, slow process, but we were finally making progress. We went to our lawyer, Charlotte, and we signed the divorce papers. It was over. The marriage was officially null and void. She was free. But the damage had already been done. She had to face her friends. She had to tell her story. She had to admit that she had been fooled. I was there with her when she made the phone calls. She would call her friends, and she would tell them everything. She would tell them about the lies, about the money, about the debts. She would tell them how she had been fooled. She would tell them that she had made a terrible mistake. She would apologize for not telling them the truth. She would apologize for her pride. Some of her friends were angry, some of them were sad, but most of them were just relieved. They were glad that she was okay. They were glad that she was finally free from the nightmare. Leia started to change. She was no longer a scared little girl. She was a woman who was finally taking control of her life. She got a job. She started a new life. She started to save money. She was finally living a life that was real. She was not pretending anymore. She was not chasing a dream that was built on lies. She was building her own life one brick at a time. It was a long road ahead, but she was finally on the right path. It felt like the ground was solid under her feet for the very first time. It felt like the ground was solid under her feet for the very first time. And for the first time it was. We had paid off the last of his bills, and the letters had stopped coming. There was a quiet that settled over the house, the kind of quiet you only get after a long, terrible storm has passed. It felt good. For a week we did nothing but breathe. We watched old movies and ate takeout from the Chinese place down the street. We didn't talk about Julian. We didn't talk about lawyers. We just existed sisters in a quiet house. But the quiet started to feel wrong. It was a selfish kind of quiet. We were safe, but what about the others? What about the other women Julian had lied to and stolen from? My blood ran cold at the thought of them still out there chasing after his lies. Maddie felt it too. She would sit on the couch and stare at her phone, a thoughtful look on her face. "He's not going to stop," she said one afternoon. "He's just going to find a new victim." I knew she was right. We had to do something. We had to put out a warning. We had to tell the truth. We decided to do it together. We bought a new domain name, something simple and to the point. We named it The Truth About Julian. We created a small website, just a single page with a short message. It didn't have our names on it. It didn't have our photos. It just had our story. We wrote about the rented suit, the fake watch, the luxury car lease, and the credit card debt he had put in Maddie's name. We wrote about the lies he had told and the dreams he had sold. We ended with a simple call to action. We asked other women who had been fooled by a man named Julian Hayes to share their stories with us. We created a little anonymous form where they could submit their stories without fear of judgment. We hoped that maybe 1 or 2 people would respond. We hoped that maybe we could help someone else from getting hurt. We never expected what came next. The first response came in 2 days later. It was from a woman in Miami. She had been engaged to Julian 6 months before I was. She had left him because he had told her he had a family emergency and had to take out a loan for $100,000. He told her he would pay it back. He never did. He had left her with nothing but a broken heart and a pile of bills. We were shocked. We had no idea he had been engaged before me. We had no idea how far back his lies went. The next day, another message came in. This one was from a woman in Los Angeles. She had met Julian in a bar. He had told her he was a big-time movie producer. He had wined and dined her for a month. He had even taken her on a trip to Hawaii, which she later found out he had paid for with her credit card. She had left him when she found out he was not a movie producer, but a part-time bartender. She had been so embarrassed she had never told anyone. She was so grateful that we had put out our story. She had been so ashamed. The messages started to come in faster and faster. They came from all over the country, from Boston to Seattle, from Dallas to Cleveland. They all had the same story. A man named Julian Hayes had entered their lives with a promise of a better future. He had used their money, their dignity, and their hearts to live a life he couldn't afford. He had left them with nothing but debt and a broken heart. We started to get emails with photos of Julian in different places with different women. We started to get letters from lawyers, from credit card companies, from banks. We started to see a pattern. He would move to a new city, find a new woman, and start the cycle all over again. The website was no longer just about our story. It was about a collective of women who had all been hurt by the same man. We started to get messages of support from women all over the country. They were sharing our story on their social media accounts. They were talking about it in their groups. They were telling their friends. The story had gone viral. It was no longer just our story. It was a community of women who had been hurt by Julian and who were finally finding a voice to speak the truth. Maddie and I worked together to sort through the messages. She was a natural at it. She would read the stories, and she would find the common threads. She would find the patterns. She would find the lies. She was no longer a scared little girl. She was a detective. She was a force of nature. We had a new purpose. We were not just two sisters who had been hurt. We were a voice for a community of women who had been hurt. We were a voice for justice. The ground was no longer solid under our feet. It was a wildfire. It was a force that was going to change everything. We were ready. It was a force that was going to change everything. And it did. The website had worked. The community had grown. We were no longer two scared women in a small house. We were the voices for a lot of people. The power of it was real, but it was also a heavy thing to hold. Every day I would get emails from women who had been scammed by Grant. Every day I would read about the lies he had told, the money he had stolen, and the lives he had ruined. It was a good thing we had done, but it also meant that our own story was stuck in place, forever tied to the memory of him. I needed to move on. I needed to get away from the house in Cleveland. I needed to build a new life, a life that was mine and not a reaction to his. I sat down with Laya one night in the living room and told her I was leaving. She was sad, but she understood. We had done so much together. We had paid off his debts. We had exposed his lies. We had become sisters again, but now it was time for us to find our own way. We were both on solid ground now. She had her own life to live, and I had mine. We hugged and we cried and we promised to visit each other. She had become so strong. She was no longer a little girl who was afraid of the world. She was a woman who was ready to face it. I sold the house in Cleveland. I said goodbye to the maple table, the sagging couch, and the old porch. I said goodbye to the memories of a life that was a lie. The whole process was simple. I had enough money in my savings to sell the house for a profit, and I had enough money left over to buy a new one. I did not want to sell it. I loved it. It was my home, but I also knew that it was a reminder of a time that I needed to forget. It was time for a new chapter. I chose Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a city I had never been to, but it was a place that felt new and full of opportunity. It was a place where I could be just me, a woman with a clean slate. I bought a small house, a bungalow with a big porch and a yard full of weeds. It cost $415,000. The house was a mess, but it was my mess. It needed a lot of work, but I was ready to do it. I was ready to build my own life one brick at a time. I didn't want a handyman. I didn't want a contractor. I wanted to do it all myself. I wanted to build a home with my own two hands. I learned how to do everything. I learned how to sand down the old wood floors. I learned how to paint the walls a new bright shade of yellow. I learned how to lay new tile in the bathroom. The work was hard, but it was so good. It was so good to use my hands to create something real, something that would last. Every nail I hammered, every piece of drywall I hung, was a piece of me coming back to life. I was no longer a woman who was broken. I was a woman who was whole. One night after a long day of painting, I sat on the porch and watched the sunset. I was tired and my hands were stained with paint, but I was so happy. I was so content. The house was not perfect, but it was my house. The life was not perfect, but it was my life. I was not alone. I had a sister who loved me, a community of women who had my back, and a new life that was all my own. I was finally free. I was free from the lies, free from the past, and free to build a future that was mine and mine alone. I had no idea what was next. I had no idea what the future held. But I was not scared. I was not afraid. I was ready. Ready for whatever a new life in a new city might bring. I found a job at a small bookstore in Charlotte called the Queen's Shelf. It was a cozy place with big windows and the smell of old paper and fresh coffee. It was the kind of place where people didn't come to show off. They came to read. It was a perfect fit for me. It was so different from my job in Cleveland, where I had to pretend that my life was as put together as my project plan. I was finally just me, Anna, a woman who loved books and who was slowly but surely building a new life. The work was peaceful. It was calm. It was so different from the chaos of my old life. One rainy Tuesday, a man came into the shop and shook the water from his coat. He was a tall man with a gentle face. He wore a simple watch, the kind that just tells you the time, not your status. He asked me for a slim poetry book. He was a high school history teacher named Ethan Cole, and he said he wanted to read some poetry to his students. He smiled, and his smile was real. It was not a sales pitch. It was not a lie. It was just a smile. I found the book for him, a used copy with a small price tag on the back. He paid with cash and left a kind note with his name and phone number. He was the kind of man who would make you believe in good things again. He came back on small weather days, on Tuesdays and on Wednesdays, and he would always ask for a new book. We would talk about the weather, about the city, about the books we loved. He never asked about my past. He never asked about my family. He just talked to me, Anna, the woman who worked at the bookstore. He was so different from Grant. Grant was always talking about money, about status, about how he was going to be a big-time millionaire. Ethan was just a teacher who loved history and who loved to read. He was a simple man who lived a simple life. He was a man who was honest. He told me he had saved $4,000 for a down payment on a new house. He said he was saving every paycheck he got. He did not brag about it. He just talked about it like it was the most normal thing in the world. He was building his own life $1 at a time. It was so different from Grant, who was always pretending to be something he wasn't. It was so different from the life I had been living. It was so different from the life I had been building. One day, I told him about the house. I told him about the renovations. He offered to help. I was hesitant at first. I didn't want to get involved with anyone else. I had been hurt so much. I had been so scared of getting hurt again. But he was so kind. He was so gentle. He just wanted to help, so I let him. He came over on a Saturday and he helped me sand the porch rail. We talked and we laughed. He didn't ask me about my past. He just talked about the porch and the best way to sand it. He said a house that is built on a solid foundation will always be a home. His words were so simple, but they were so true. We worked on the house together for a long time. He helped me paint the door, lay new tile, and hang new drywall. We ate grilled cheese sandwiches and split a $9 pie from the bakery down the street. We did not go to fancy restaurants. We did not go on expensive trips. We just worked on the house together. It was so good. It was so peaceful. It was so real. I was finally building a life that was mine, and I was doing it with a man who was honest and real. He was not pretending to be something he wasn't. He was a simple man who loved history and who loved to read. He was a man who was a good man. I was finally at peace. I had finally found peace, a kind of deep, quiet contentment that I hadn't realized was missing from my life. It was like I had been holding my breath for a very long time, and now I could finally exhale. Ethan and I had been working on the house for months. The floors were sanded and stained a warm honey color. The walls were painted a soft, calming shade of blue that made the rooms feel bigger. We had finished the kitchen with new white cabinets and a beautiful wooden countertop we had built together. The house was not just a place I lived. It was a place we had built, a place that was a testament to our life together. It was a life that was real and true, a life that was not a performance for the world to see. One cool Saturday morning, we were in the backyard, planting a new rose bush by the porch steps. My hands were in the dirt, and my heart was full. Ethan stopped what he was doing and looked at me. His eyes were so kind. His smile was so real. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple silver ring. It was not a diamond ring. It was not a showy ring. It was just a simple ring, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "I want to build a life with you," he said, "one brick at a time, $1 at a time, one day at a time. Will you marry me, Anna?" I didn't even have to think about it. "Yes," I said. 1,000 times yes. We didn't have a big wedding. We didn't want one. We wanted a life that was real, not a spectacle. My sister Laya came on the morning train from Cleveland, and she was so happy for us. She had grown so much. She was so strong. She had her own job now. She was living on her own. She had found her own strength. She was no longer a scared little girl. She was a woman who was in control of her own life. She was so happy for me. She was so happy for us. We were married at City Hall on a sunny Friday. There was no orchestra. There was no show. There were just the two of us, Laya and a judge. The whole process took about 10 minutes and cost us $120. It was so simple. It was so beautiful. It was so real. We said our vows, and our words were not written on paper. They were written on our hearts. We promised to be a team. We promised to be there for each other. We promised to be a home for each other. It was a promise that was not based on money or status, but on love and on truth. As we walked out of the courtroom, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I almost didn't look at it. I wanted to stay in this moment forever, but I did. It was a text message from our lawyer, Charlotte. It was just a few words. "Grant was arrested. Fraud. Financial abuse. It's over." I read the text a few times to make sure I was not imagining things. I was not. The man who had been my fiancé, the man who had pretended to be a wealthy millionaire, the man who had ruined my sister's life had finally been caught. The police had found him. The truth had found him. The justice we had been seeking had finally been found. I showed the text to Ethan. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a quiet strength. "I'm so sorry, Anna," he said. "I am so happy for you." I showed the text to Laya. She read it, and a huge wave of relief washed over her face. She started to cry, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure joy. We hugged. We were so happy. We were so relieved. We were so grateful. It was over. The nightmare was over. The lies were over. The past was over. We had won. We had won the battle for our lives. We had won the battle for our peace. We had won the battle for our future. It was a good day. It was a very good day. We went home to the house we had built together, to our home. We didn't go to a fancy restaurant. We didn't go on a luxury trip. We just stayed at home. We ate grilled cheese sandwiches and split a $9 pie from the corner bakery. We were not in a fancy restaurant. We were not on a luxury trip. We were just at home. We were just together. We were finally free to build our own lives. The past was over. The future was here. A new beginning was here. A new beginning was here. It was a new beginning that was so full of joy it felt like a dream. Ethan and I had a life that was so quiet, so peaceful, so full of love. We would spend our weekends working on the house and our evenings cooking dinner together. Our life was not a show. It was a home. It was a family. It was a life that was so real I felt like I could finally breathe. We took trips, just the two of us. We went to New York City. We walked through Central Park and ate hot dogs from a street vendor. We went to Chicago. We rode the train, and we ate deep dish pizza. And then we went to Cleveland. Going back to Cleveland was the hardest thing I had ever done. It was the place where all the lies had started. It was the place where I had fallen. It was the place where I had lost my sister. It was a place that was full of so much pain. But when we got there, it was different. It was not a place of pain anymore. It was a place of healing. We walked the same streets. We went to the same restaurants. We walked past the old house. It was a little blue house on a little American street. It was not a place of pain anymore. It was a place of victory. It was the place where my sister and I had won. It was a place that was full of so much love. I was finally at peace with the past. I was finally free from the lies. We came home to a life that was so full of happiness. We had everything we wanted. We had a home. We had a family. We had each other. We had a life that was so full of love. But then the letter came. It was a simple white envelope with a window on the front. It was from a bank. It was from the same bank that Grant had used to open the fake account with my sister's name. My heart went cold. I knew what it was. I knew it was not a good thing. I knew it was not a good day. I did not want to open it. I wanted to throw it away. I wanted to pretend that it did not exist. But I could not. I had to open it. I had to know. I opened the letter, and the words on the paper were a slap in the face. It was not a letter from the police. It was not a letter from a judge. It was a letter from a lawyer. It was a letter that said that Grant had filed for bankruptcy. He had not gone to jail. He had not been punished. He had not paid for his crimes. He had just declared bankruptcy, and all his debts were erased. All the money we had spent on lawyers, all the money we had spent on paying off his debts, all the money we had spent on our new life, was for nothing. He was free. He had not been punished. He had not paid for his lies. I felt a fire rise in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to yell. I wanted to throw something. I had been so sure that we had won. I had been so sure that justice had been served. I had been so sure that the nightmare was over. But it was not. It was a lie. It was a big, terrible lie. We had not won. We had not found justice. We had just found a new kind of pain, a new kind of anger, a new kind of betrayal. I felt so hurt. I felt so betrayed. I felt so angry. The peace I had felt for so long was gone. It was gone, and in its place was a feeling of raw, unvarnished anger. I called my sister. She had received the same letter. She was so angry. She was so hurt. She was so sad. We had fought so hard. We had done so much. We had given so much. We had won. We had won the battle. We had won the war. But the enemy had just walked away. He had just walked away, and he had not paid for his crimes. It was a bitter, terrible pill to swallow. It was a pill that was so hard to swallow. We had to face the truth. We had to face the fact that life is not a movie. It does not always have a happy ending. It does not always have a perfect ending. It does not always have a just ending. It was a hard lesson to learn. We had so many questions. Why had he been allowed to do it? Why had the justice system failed us? Why had he been allowed to get away with it? We had no answers. We had only our anger. We had only our pain. We had only our disappointment. I looked at Ethan. He did not say a word. He just held my hand. He held my hand and he looked at me with so much love. He knew what I was feeling. He knew what I was thinking. He knew what I was going through. He was my rock. He was my strength. He was my peace. But even with him, the anger would not go away. The hurt would not go away. The betrayal would not go away. It was a wound that was so deep. It was a wound that would never heal. We had to live with it. We had to learn to live with it. We had to learn to live with a life that was not perfect. We had to learn to live with a life that was not just. It was the hardest lesson we would ever learn. The hardest lesson we would ever learn. But it was also the most important one. Justice, I realized, does not always come in the form of a court order. Sometimes it comes from the quiet courage it takes to get up, dust yourself off, and build your own life. Sitting on the couch with Laya and Ethan, I felt the last of my anger begin to ease. It was a slow process, but it was real. I had given so much. We had given so much. My life savings had been taken to pay off the debts of a man who was not worth a single penny. Laya's life had been turned upside down. My house in Cleveland, the place I had believed was safe, had become a reminder of so many lies. And now he had walked away. He was free. I looked at Laya. She was wiping away her tears. The pain was still there, but I saw something else in her eyes. Strength. Determination. Laya was no longer the naive girl who had believed the promises of a rich man. She was a woman who had been through so much. She had worked so hard. She had paid off her debts. She had built her life back up. "I don't want him to win," she said. "I want him to pay." I looked at Ethan. He did not say a word, but he took my hand. His hand was warm and strong. His eyes were full of love. He was not a hero who had come to rescue me. He was a man who had chosen to be with me no matter what. He was a man who had chosen to be with me not for money or status, but for me. I took a deep breath. That breath was the truth. That breath was love. That breath was peace. "He did not win," I said. "We won. We won the battle for our lives." That was a truth I had to learn. The fight was not for him to go to jail. The fight was for us to have a better life. We had won. He may have escaped a sentence, but he could not escape the truth. He could not escape a life that was built on lies. He could not escape a life that had no love, no truth, no peace. He had lost everything. We decided to let go. We decided not to let the anger consume us. We decided not to let the injustice destroy us. We decided to live a life that he would never be able to have. A life that was built on love. A life that was built on truth. A life that was built on peace. Laya went back to school. She got her confidence back. She became a strong, independent woman. She got a good job. She had her own small apartment. She found her peace. She found her happiness. I was so proud of her. I had always been proud of her, but now I was even more proud. Ethan and I finished our house. We created a home that we loved. Our house was not a big house. It was not a luxurious house. It was just a house. But it was our house. It was a place that we had built from the ground up, a place that we had built with love. We no longer thought about him. He had become a part of the past. He had become a lesson. He had become a reminder of what not to do. He had not been able to take away our peace. He had not been able to take away our happiness. He had not been able to take away our love. He had not been able to take away everything that truly mattered. He may have taken the money, but he could not take our lives. Our lives full of truth and love were the greatest revenge. My story does not end there. I am still living. I am still building. I am still loving. Life is a long journey. There are times when you fall. There are times when you are hurt. There are times when you are betrayed. But the most important thing is that you get back up. You have to keep going. You have to keep living. Because when you live a life that is true, a life that is full of love, you have won. You have found your own justice. You might not believe that any story ends so well, but it is the truth. I am living in a happy ending. I am living in a story that has given me a new life. If you want to know more about how I did it, please leave your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what this story meant to you. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe so I can share more stories with you.